Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning as well for colleagues joining online from Latin America. I'm Luisa Fondello, International Cooperation Officer from Caritas Europa, and I'll be facilitating today's session. Thanks a lot for joining us, and COMECE for welcoming us. I welcome you on behalf of both Caritas Europa and COMECE, as well as our partners, CELAM and Caritas Latin America and the Caribbean. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, just some technical issues, but I think everything's working smoothly now. So before we begin, I would like to just go over some very brief housekeeping rules. So as you can see, we have interpretation into Spanish available for those of you who would like to use this. We kindly ask you to use Zoom on your phone to connect to the Zoom call. You have the QR codes on the paper on your chairs or behind you there on the wall. And if you need a headset, if you don't have your own, you can ask our colleagues who are kindly helping us here from COMECE staff. Yeah. And for those colleagues joining online, I hope you're familiarized with the Zoom settings. You should be able to choose the language of your preference by clicking on the little symbol of a globe on the bottom on the right. And if anyone has any issues whatsoever with interpretation, you can please flag to one of us or also at the chat Zoom. So maybe some other colleagues will join us a bit late. We had close to 100 people registered, half meant to be here in person and half online. I think that online we have some 25 people so far. And one minor detail, if anyone would like to use the restroom in this direction down the stairs. Yeah. So we're hoping to have a dynamic discussion. So colleagues who are attending online, you're welcome to keep your videos on if your connection allows, but please make sure to keep your mic off, of course. And we'll have a specific time allocated for questions and answers from the audience. But if you're already thinking of comments and questions, you can write them down in the chat so you don't forget about them. We'll begin some initial inputs from some colleagues who are here and colleagues online before we actually move more to discussion and a debate. So first of all, I would like to welcome Monsignor Mariano Crociata, who is the president of COMECE, which is the Commission of the Bishops' Conferences of the European Union, who are hosting us today. Thank you very much for joining us. We would like to hear your welcoming remarks.
Thank you to you. Co-organized together with the Latin American Episcopal Council, Caritas Latin America and the Caribbean, and Caritas Europa.
Caritas América Latina, Caritas el Caribe, Caritas Europa. Nuestro evento se celebra antes de la cumbre entre los líderes.
States will gather in this framework after more than 7 years here in Brussels next month. How can the EU-CELAC Summit contribute to a partnership of equals and promote global justice? Is the question that stands in the center of our debate today. Indeed, at a time when our two regions are facing a number of humanitarian, security, socioeconomic, political, as well as environmental challenges, the summit and its follow-up represent a unique opportunity to reinforce bi-regional cooperation, but also
no solamente, sino también para crear una
principles of justice, solidarity, fraternity, and sustainability that leaves no one behind. Based on these shared values, the European Union and CELAC are natural partners in shaping the post-COVID world by jointly addressing the structural causes of imbalances and humanizing our societies in an international system that risks being more and more fragmented with fewer global common standards, with eroding international institutions and the multilateral relations, and growing economic and financial logics of profit maximization at all costs. Since a people-centered partnership between our two regions that would also benefit the world is of concern to the Catholic Church on both sides of the Atlantic, we as bishops of the European Union elaborated jointly with our brothers in Latin America and the Caribbean, together with the Caritas sister organizations of both regions, a contribution in view of the upcoming summit, entitled A Partnership of Hope for the Good of Our Peoples and a More Fraternal World. The joint document is grounded on the Church's daily accompaniment of people facing situations of vulnerability, and it offers a number of observations, reflections, recommendations, and good practices that are structured around three pillars. First, integral human development and social justice. Second, integral ecology and care for our common home. And third, peace and a culture of encounter. Throughout history, our two regions have developed strong economic and social relations. The economic and trade cooperation has grown over years, and it promises to intensify even further in the coming months and years. However, we are also aware of colonial legacies and historical injustices, which created imbalances in our relations that in certain forms continue to be perpetuated by some European policies, practices, and consumption patterns, irresponsibly exploiting the natural resource of the LAC region and undermining efforts aimed at sustainable human development. In this respect, it is my hope that our today's debate will enable us to reflect on perspectives from both sides of the Atlantic on how a mutually beneficial partnership could better promote fair and sustainable trade and corporate accountability, implement a just ecological transition, and enhance socioeconomic justice across our regions. I would, however, also wish to invite us to regard the EU-CELAC cooperation as an opportunity to learn from each other and to foster personal and community ties between our regions. Strong human, cultural, as well as spiritual ties unite us beyond economic interests. Human mobility between the two regions in both directions has been a constant feature in our relations for centuries. We share history, languages, culture, and religious beliefs. Religion and culture are still deeply embedded in local realities, and they are one of the key determinants of community and personal bonds across select societies. And it is therefore my hope that the future EU-CELAC partnership may also focus on this dimension and promote interreligious and intercultural cooperation as a source of mutual enrichment. Strengthening people-to-people contacts and indeed creating opportunities for participation in political and economic processes for all, particularly those most affected and those facing situations of marginalization is also key for overcoming threats to social cohesion and peace. Attitudes of mutual listening and learning may also inspire our discussions today, so that this may contribute to the shaping of a partnership that, in challenging times like this, can give hope to the people of our regions and promote a more peaceful, just, sustainable, and welcoming world. I thank you for your attention and wish us all a fruitful debate.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Crociata, for these welcoming remarks. And now we will more specifically from Monsignor Jaime Spengler from CELAM, which is the Latin American Episcopal Council. So, Monsieur Jaime Spengler, please, the floor is yours.
Buenos dias, estimados senhores e senhoras. La Conferência de
The Bishops' Conference of the European Union and the Episcopal Council of Latin America and the Caribbean, together with Caritas of both continents, have had the opportunity to reflect and discern together on the reality that is affecting our peoples and the possibilities for mutual cooperation. It has been and still is an opportunity to highlight the need to promote the common good, a sign that highlights
por la escucha atenta y el reconocimiento de riquezas y debilidades comunes nos pueden llevar a encontrar nuevos caminos para el desarrollo de nuestros pueblos. El análisis de la realidad nos hace ver con preocupación las condiciones desiguales entre los países que participan en el sistema. Los modelos de producción y de negocio que se basan en la explotación de las personas y del planeta, las normas comerciales injustas, la inicua arquitectura financiera y de la deuda mundial, la frágil apropiación democrática de los procesos de elaboración de políticas y de toma de decisiones, y los sistemas alimentarios insostenibles e injustos. Como lo expresamos en el documento, dado que estes retos y desequilibrios globales solo pueden abordarse mediante su reconocimiento y la cooperación internacional, es esencial que Europa y América Latina y Caribe se comprometan a construir respuestas comunes. Las autoridades públicas tienen una responsabilidad especial a la hora de trabajar por el bien común, creando condiciones que hagan posible que todos vivan una vida digna y que favorezcan el desarrollo humano integral, el desarrollo de cada persona y de toda la persona. Destacamos el papel de los estados y, consecuentemente, de los líderes gubernamentales y políticos en la construcción de una sociedad más justa, equitativa e integradora, capaz de respetar y valorar los derechos humanos y el cuidado del medio ambiente, la casa común. Ni el crecimiento ni la participación del sector privado en sí mismos pueden garantizar la erradicación de la pobreza o la inclusión social, sino que más bien pueden exacerbar las desigualdades socioeconómicas y la degradación medioambiental si no existen marcos reguladores públicos sólidos que hagan cumplir el principio de no hacer daño y políticas redistributivas que mitiguen las desigualdades. El aumento de la participación y la inversión del sector privado debe ir acompañada de mecanismos de salvaguardia adequados, incluída la diligencia debida en materia de derechos humanos y medio ambiente. El creciente papel del sector privado no debe producirse antes de que se hayan establecido y funcionen estos sólidos mecanismos en favor de los más desfavorecidos. Es urgente un cambio de paradigma. Así, sostenemos que la justicia social y, en particular, una opción preferencial por los pobres son claves para superar las causas estructurales y la exclusión y la opresión, apuntando a transformar nuestras economías para que éstas puedan responder de mejor modo y reducir las diversas fracturas de nuestras sociedades, económicas, generacionales, culturales, digitales, etc., así como el abandono, la explotación y la destrucción abusiva del medio ambiente, nuestra casa común. Es importante asegurar un marco adecuado para que, al momento de negociar acuerdos comerciales, se siga siempre un enfoque centrado en las personas, basado en valores éticos y en consonancia con los principios ya establecidos tanto en la Unión Europea como en América Latina y el Caribe. Como cristianos, creemos que el comercio debe beneficiar a las personas, no solo a los mercados y las economías, y que cada actividad económica debe tener como objetivo el desarrollo humano integral. Todo acuerdo entre la Unión Europea y la CELAC debe prestar atención prioritaria a la protección del medio ambiente y de la salud de las comunidades locales, entre otras cosas, valorando los conocimientos de los pueblos indígenas y afrodescendientes, y apoyando a los países más débiles de ambas regiones, que a menudo carecen de las tecnologías y los recursos para mantener un medio ambiente seguro. Sería crucial redoblar los esfuerzos mundiales para cancelar la deuda internacional de los países latinoamericanos y caribeños altamente endeudados, a fin de que sus gobiernos puedan invertir estos recursos en programas de educación, sanidad y protección social. Estos esfuerzos deberían ir acompañados de políticas fiscales progresivas destinadas a reducir las desigualdades y apoyar unos servicios públicos básicos de calidad y la formación y las oportunidades laborales para aquellas personas experimentando pobreza y situaciones de vulnerabilidad. Las experiencias que ya se han llevado a cabo en países como Perú y que mencionamos en el documento nos muestran que es posible y necesario. Incluimos en nuestras recomendaciones varios temas que ameritan una reflexión seria e que respondem a los clamores de nuestros pueblos que compartem valores, religiões e cultura, e que los invitamos a reflexionar e poder abrir canais de diálogo e participação. É importante, sim, reconhecer devidamente o papel específico de los actores religiosos e de las organizações confessionais, junto com outras organizações da sociedade civil, em el apoio ao desenvolvimento humano sostenible e à la paz. Estes actores também deveriam participar em los processos de consulta prévios à la cumbre União Europeia e América Latina e Caribe, e onde a mesma poderia apoiar-se nas iniciativas interconfessionais locais ou regionais pertinentes. Com a próxima cumbre, ambas regiões têm uma oportunidade única de reforçar sua cooperação em forma de uma cooperação justa e mutuamente beneficiosa, que vá mais allá do antiquado enfoque donante-receptor. Uma cooperação que em tempos difíceis de esperança a los pueblos de nossas regiões, não só oferecendo respostas a curto prazo a las emergências, sino centrando-se em abordar os problemas estruturais que aumentam as vulnerabilidades de los países de América Latina e el Caribe e que provocam efeitos desproporcionados das crises mundiais em suas poblações. Muitas gracias.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Spengler, for providing a very clear overview of the key issues at stake and key concerns from our respective networks and more broadly from other civil society actors from Europe and from the Latin America and Caribbean region. I think we have a very good set the scene and contextualization of why we're here today and the objectives that we have with today's discussion. So we'll start with our panelists who will provide some more specific and thematic inputs related to what has already been alluded to in the introductory remarks. First, I have here next to me, Sorka from Troker, which is the official development agency of the Catholic Church in Ireland. So thanks a lot for joining us from Ireland. We're happy to have you here. So Sorka is the Global Policy Advisor on Human Rights and Corporate Accountability at Troker. And she has 15 years of experience in human rights, public engagement, and advocacy. In recent years, she worked as the Irish Coalition for Business and Human Rights Coordinator, and now she works with Troker. As part of her role, she works with Troker's partner organizations in other regions and countries, such as Honduras and Guatemala, supporting local communities in the defense and protection of their land and environment. So it is with this experience and expertise that she comes today to shed some light into how corporate accountability can have a key role in the future framework of the EU-CELAC partnership. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for having me, and it was great to hear from the previous speakers, so thank you. So I'll just be as quick as I can, and if I speak too fast, please tell me to slow down because I tend to. So at Troper, we have witnessed and documented abusive corporate practice in Latin America, where corporations have acted irresponsibly, violating the human rights of people and the planet. While jobs and economic growth may allow some communities to lift themselves out of poverty, the absence of a comprehensive global legal framework on business and human rights has allowed many businesses to exploit communities, stealing land, polluting rivers, and inflicting brutal violence on those who question them. Their activities have contributed to climate breakdown, biodiversity collapse, and the erosion of workers' and trade union rights, forced and child labour, growing poverty, reprisals, and the killings of environmental and human rights defenders. We've seen such harm in Brazil with the Brumadinho Dam disaster in 2019, the Cerrejón mine in Colombia, palm oil plantations and extractive industries in Honduras. The current regulatory framework is largely voluntary, namely the OECD guidelines and the UN guiding principles. While these mechanisms have been important at setting international standards, their applications are not binding. This means it is ineffective at preventing abuses of human rights by corporations. Most of those violations go unpunished. The size, influence, and complexity of corporations pose major challenges for states to hold them to account. Impunity regarding human rights abuses for companies is increasing. Frontline Defenders' recent global report highlights the increasing number of human rights defenders in 2022 that are murdered. In 2022, 401 human rights defenders from 26 countries were killed. This is up from 331 in 2020. 48% of them work defending land and environmental and indigenous people's rights. 5 countries, namely Colombia, Ukraine, Mexico, Brazil, and Honduras, accounted for over 80% of the global total. Abuse of corporate practice in Latin America and the Caribbean is not solely perpetuated by local companies. Europe must not hide its complicity. European companies, investors, and banks are often directly linked or contributing to such practices, particularly in the mining and extractive sector. Troika has witnessed corporate impunity for companies contributing to human rights and environmental harms. For example, in 2016, the Honduran environmental activist Berta Cáceres was killed trying to protect her ancestral lands against the Agua Zarca hydroelectric project, bankrolled by European financial institutions. The Agua Zarca Dam was part of a series of environmental destructive mega projects that would affect indigenous groups the Honduran government had approved without consulting with the Lenca community, who opposed the project as it infringed on their sacred river. It also threatened to drain the local water supply, damage the environment, and destroy local communities' livelihoods. Dutch development banks from FMO and Finnish investors FinFund decided to come in and finance the dam's construction despite evidence of intimidation and a direct plea from Berta Cáceres not to do so. Her long aggression against the Lencan community culminated in the assassination of Berta in her home in La Esperanza on the night of March 2nd, 2016. FMO and FinFund only suspended loans for the Agua Zarca project once another activist, Nelson Garcia, was murdered 12 days after Berta's death. The murder sparked global outrage, and in 2022, the CEO of DESA, the Honduran wing of the company, was sentenced to 22 and a half years for imprisonment for planning and ordering the assassination. There was no recourse taken against the EU funders, even though they are funding a project that was directly linked to intimidation and environmental harms. This case, and there are many more, demonstrate the gaps in accountability for corporations that require an urgent global response. The EU and Latin American and Caribbean countries should work together to adopt strong legal frameworks and enforcement mechanisms for responsible business, including binding due diligence legislation for business companies, and work constructively together towards the adoption of an international binding treaty on business and human rights. Last week, on the 1st of June, members of the European Parliament voted in favour of new legislation that would make EU companies responsible for any human rights violation or damage to the environment in their global value chains. The Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, a mouthful, would require businesses to ensure their value chains are free of environmental or human rights abuses. Now that the text has passed, the plenary vote at the EP, negotiations to decide the final content of the law will commence between the EU member states, the Parliament and the Commission. The first of these meetings is scheduled for this Thursday. To date, the Parliament text, while flawed, is the most progressive of the 3 texts. If communities in Latin America and the Caribbean are to see change in corporate behaviour and to end corporate impunity, then the Parliament text must be not be watered down at these trilogues. While progress made on CSCD is positive, EU's forthcoming directive on sustainable corporate governance will likely ensure a level playing field and common regulatory framework for companies based or operating only in the EU. However, value chains are complex global structures operating across different levels of jurisdictions. National and EU and international laws must reinforce and complement each other to protect human rights and the environment, and so close the governance gaps so companies are not subject to competing or contradictory standards. I suppose to avoid a race to the bottom on standards, Progress at all levels is necessary. The current patchwork approach has led to loopholes, enabling companies, especially those operating transnationally, to evade responsibility and frontline communities to continue to face injustice without remedy. Last paragraph.
Time, but you can speak a bit more slowly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Since 2014, Latin America and the Caribbean countries have been at the forefront of negotiations for the legally binding treaty.
Han estado en primera línea en las negociaciones.
The legally binding international treaty focuses more on transnational obstacles and bringing claims across jurisdictions. The treaty is a multilateral instrument, including a much broader community of states than the CSDDD, as it's called, and will be more effective globally, aligning companies worldwide. The EU is missing a crucial.
La AELU le falta una oportunidad. En América Latina, los países del Caribe deben trabajar juntos con Europa para definir un instrumento vinculante, un marco que pueda asegurar que las compañías de la EU y América Latina puedan cumplir con estas y asegurar que el impacto que tienen en el medio ambiente. Gracias, pero yo así no puedo, perdón. Gracias por recordarnos de las consecuencias de las elecciones políticas y las oportunidades que se pueden plantear para formar unas colaboraciones más fuertes. Ahora pasamos.
From Ecuador and remotely, and that is Elizabeth Coca, who is Eco-Theology Coordinator at Caritas Ecuador. I hope she's there in the screen with us. Elizabeth is an agroeconomist and specialist in climate change policy and biodiversity. She has professional experience in public and private institutions in urban and rural areas. As part of her current role in Caritas, she engages in networks such as REPAN, which is the Red Ecclesial.
En redes como REPAN y coordina proyectos para fortalecer las comunidades afectadas por conflictos socioambientales. Elizabeth, es un honor tenerte aquí. Nos interesaría escuchar tu experiencia y tu testimonio en tu trabajo diario, las recomendaciones que tienes para esta asociación potencial para la protección de los derechos medioambientales y en esta transición ecológica. Tienes 7 minutos. Gracias.
Buenos días, buenas tardes con todas las personas que me escuchan. Es un gusto poder participar y agradezco a quienes me han invitado. Como ya lo mencionaron, me dirijo a ustedes desde la mitad del mundo y precisamente viajando.
The world, precisely as you travel through the equatorial Amazon, I was asked to address you for a very concrete theme, which is the ecological transition. And what we are affirming with regard to this topic. I would like for us to recall where this transition has come from or where these topics have come from. I will quickly share the history that we have as a humanity with regard to this topic. Please confirm if you can see my screen. Thank you, Monsignor. We've been discussing for many years the decarbonization of the economy, reducing the...
de generar electricidad o energías renovables. Y el Acuerdo de París nos plantea que un sistema eléctrico deberá ser 100% renovable. Y también nos surge en el 2015 la conversión ecológica planteada por el Papa Francisco, Laudato Si. Y desde ahí vamos a hablar de la transición ecológica como un camino que hay que recorrer para lograr los objetivos que el Acuerdo de París y todas las naciones se han propuesto. Planteamos a la transición ecológica integral como un proceso de transformación social que busca avanzar hacia un modelo de vida justa y que prioriza el bien común sobre el crecimiento económico. Nosotros en esta ocasión planteamos que los indicadores de crecimiento no deben seguir siendo los económicos, no deben seguir siendo el PIB. Nosotros planteamos en base a investigaciones hechas en Latinoamérica por la CEPAL que los indicadores de crecimiento deberían ser el índice del planeta vivo o el índice de bienestar económico sostenible, que justamente son aquellos índices que han disminuido y que son antagónicos al PIB. Mientras más grande sea el PIB, menos bienestar económico sostenible existe. Y de eso tenemos investigaciones. Y planteamos como principios lo que ya el Papa nos ha dicho: la ecología ambiental, la ecología cultural, la ecología de la vida cotidiana, el principio del bien común y la justicia entre generaciones. Aquí vamos a hacer énfasis sobre lo que nosotros vemos como transición energética justa, que es un eje transversal de la transición ecológica integral y que debe considerar preservar servicios ecosistémicos como agua, suelo, bosques, océanos, paisajes y la biodiversidad de los derechos de las comunidades, principalmente de los países menos desarrollados. Y planteamos tres principios para esto: la reducción de la demanda energética, la justicia energética y la corresponsabilidad del cuidar la casa común. La reducción de la demanda energética está orientado a todos, pero principalmente a los países desarrollados, como la Unión Europea, que mantienen altos estándares de consumo de energía y que se sostienen en base a la explotación histórica de los recursos naturales de los países del sur, lo que en ecología política llamamos el norte sobre el sur. Y para hacer esto hay que desacelerar un ritmo de consumo y dar paso a otro tipo de desarrollo. Precisamente los que nosotros planteamos que se midan con el índice de planeta vivo y el índice de bienestar económico sostenible. Tenemos que mirar a la justicia energética. Ahora nos están hablando de el despliegue de energías renovables bajo un mismo modelo de producción. No nos están diciendo que disminuyamos ni el consumo de energía ni el consumo de recursos. Simplemente nos dicen cambiemos de materia prima. Dejemos los combustibles fósiles y cambiemos a la energía eléctrica, pero esa energía eléctrica pone en riesgo a las comunidades y a los ecosistemas, igual o más que lo ha venido haciendo los combustibles fósiles. Y luego vemos que organizaciones que están dedicadas a los combustibles fósiles están haciendo su migración a la, en teoría, energía renovable. ¿Por qué? Porque es más rentable. En ningún momento se ha hablado de que realmente hay un interés por descarbonizar o porque es gratuito, sino porque al momento los procesos de extracción de combustibles fósiles son más elevados, los costos son más elevados que los que implica la energía renovable, aparentemente. Entonces, estas mismas empresas están adquiriendo la tecnología hidráulica, la tecnología eólica, la tecnología fotovoltaica, la biomasa, el biogás, pero es porque existe más rentabilidad. No estamos hablando en absoluto de querer beneficiar al planeta. Y esta transición energética que está planteada no es justa, está teniendo un precio muy alto en relación a toda la vulneración de derechos en Latinoamérica, en África y a toda la destrucción. Seguimos destruyendo bosques, seguimos emitiendo CO2, ya no por combustibles fósiles, ahora lo emitimos de otra manera. Por eso la justicia energética debe permitir la descentralización del acceso a la energía. Y nosotros planteamos que incluso se hable no ya de la energía como un derecho, no como un negocio, no como algo mercantil. Al descentralizar el acceso a la energía, podemos fomentar la creación de empleos locales, reducir la dependencia de grandes empresas energéticas y mejorar la resiliencia de los casos de desastres naturales. Queremos también hablar de la corresponsabilidad de cuidar la casa común. La economía actual basada en los combustibles fósiles, insisto, plantea una transición energética sostenible solamente cambiando de un recurso de materia prima. Y entonces no están viendo o no estamos viendo que pasar de una economía basada en combustibles fósiles a energías limpias está causando toda la destrucción con la minería a gran escala en los biomas amazónicos. Los vehículos eléctricos representan la destrucción del monzón, de la Amazonía, de los páramos, la deforestación, la emisión del CO2, la implementación de mega hidroeléctricas que destruyen cuencas hidrográficas en Latinoamérica, en África, pero también en donde están ustedes, en Europa, y en los pueblos originales que se quedan sin acceso al agua, con ríos contaminados por mercurio, por cianuro, y el asesinato de los defensores o de aquellos que se atreven a elevar la voz. Otro ejemplo ponemos es que en el caso del Ecuador, la energía eólica para China, que ha planteado descarbonizarse también, ha representado o está representando la deforestación de la balsa en la Amazonía y también en los bosques húmedos, porque necesitan esa madera para construir todo este aparataje para la energía eólica. Entonces, es importante que cuando planteemos una transición energética justa, hablemos también de todo lo que está causando en los que menos tienen. Y eso es vulneración de derechos, criminalización de protectores, contaminación de fuentes hídricas, destrucción de tejido social. Tenemos guerras concretas civiles en nuestros pueblos, causadas por la pobreza energética, por la injusticia energética, por la deforestación y por emisiones de CO2. Tenemos grandes empresas petroleras y mineras encarcelando a nuestros indígenas, encarcelando a nuestros campesinos por oponerse a esta depredación de la naturaleza, por oponerse al cuidado del agua, al cuidado de la vida. Así que pedimos y planteamos que consideremos que las economías basadas en los hidrocarburos están invirtiendo millones de dólares para diversificar sus carteras y están produciendo energía renovable, convirtiéndose en líderes globales de tecnología, pero no solo por cuidar la atmósfera, sino porque les conviene económicamente. Y esto lo hemos sacado de la experiencia que tenemos en territorio, pero también de investigaciones que hemos realizado y que les respaldamos en esta presentación. Les animamos a debatir la energía como un derecho y no como que se trate, no como un negocio, la pobreza energética que cada uno de nosotros enfrenta, la justicia energética y que los ciudadanos asuman sus responsabilidades y su derecho, pero que reconozcamos que los que estamos acá en el sur tenemos responsabilidades, pero no tanta como las que tienen los que más energía gastan. Esta ha sido mi participación en base al tema que me han presentado, pues que me han pedido que prepare y estamos pues agradecidos por la oportunidad.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for presenting to us some very difficult but important questions, and also bringing to the discussion this perspective that we need not only an energy transition, but also, and to focus on energy efficiency, but also sufficiency, and really distinguish between real alternatives and false alternatives. So thanks so much for bringing this to the debate. And now we'll move to our next panelist, who is also joining us online and speaking in Spanish, who is Humberto Ortiz Roca, who is an economist and coordinator in the Development and Projects Office of CELAM. Humberto is a Peruvian economist, and he's specialized in social and solidarity economy issues. And he also contributes to the work of REPAN, which is the Pan-Amazonian Ecclesial Network. And he is one of the coordinators of the Center for Social Environmental Justice and Buen Vivir in the REPAN network. Thanks a lot for joining us, Humberto. So I'll give you now the floor for 7 minutes.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, voy a hablar de la justicia económica y el desarrollo humano integral solidario. En la perspectiva de la economía solidaria, el Papa Francisco se pronuncia a favor de una
The
economía
Deputy Pope Francis speaks in favor of an economy that cares for people and
en la perspectiva de la justicia económica y la solidaridad global para que nadie quede afuera, como bien ha dicho Monseñor Jaime. El Papa Francisco además nos propone trabajar por las 3 T, tierra, trabajo y techo, que son necesarios para una vida digna de las personas, pues son necesidades fundamentales, sobre todo para los más pobres y marginados, como yo lo afirmaba San Juan Pablo VI en Populorum Progressio. Es necesario, pues, garantizar los derechos de los trabajadores y trabajadoras, la protección social, los derechos de los y las migrantes y, sin duda, la responsabilidad social de los actores económicos, en especial la responsabilidad social de las empresas. El derecho a la tierra es fundamental, sobre todo considerando la base de la alimentación de la agricultura, en la agricultura familiar, que suministra en América Latina y el Caribe a más del 80% de los alimentos. Pero también el territorio, que para los pueblos originarios no solo se refiere a un factor productivo en un sentido económico, sino a una cosmovisión de la vinculación del ser humano con la casa común, con la madre tierra, con la Pachamama, que tiene por ende un sentido espiritual, y que San Francisco le llamó la hermana madre tierra. Para los pueblos originarios es el fundamento del buen vivir, que va más allá de la concepción occidental de desarrollo. Por otro lado, en la economía global, la pandemia ha afectado a todos los países con graves repercusiones económicas, sobre todo a los más vulnerables países. El endeudamiento externo ha aumentado en la gran mayoría de los países de América Latina y el Caribe. Muchos de ellos no tienen indicadores de sostenibilidad de la deuda, pues el coeficiente que se suele utilizar en este tema de la sostenibilidad, que es el coeficiente entre el stock de la deuda externa pública respecto al Producto Bruto Interno, en muchos casos es mayor del 30%. ¿Esto qué significa? Significa que el superávit primario de los presupuestos públicos deben aplicarse a pagar el servicio de la deuda externa, con el notable peligro para la necesaria inversión social en salud, educación, alimentación, ambiente sano y otros rubros prioritarios. El Papa Francisco también retomó el pedido de San Juan Pablo II de reducir, mitigar o cancelar la deuda externa, lo cual lo dice más fuertemente en la encíclica Tercio Milenio Adveniente en el número 51. En América Latina ha habido importantes experiencias de reducción de la deuda externa, con la creación de fondos de contravalor para aplicar los recursos liberados del servicio de la deuda a la inversión social y ambiental. Un fondo de contravalor significa que el país acreedor renuncia éticamente a cobrar parte de la deuda externa a condición que el país deudor invierta esos recursos en el desarrollo humano, en la lucha contra la pobreza y contra la desigualdad. Esa es la experiencia de los fondos de contravalor. Por otra parte, la economía popular, que podemos llamarla como el conjunto de actividades de producción, distribución o consumo desarrolladas por poblaciones de los sectores urbanos populares o campesinos, y cuya finalidad es satisfacer las necesidades básicas personales y familiares, hoy en día esta economía popular da empleo a más del 80% de la población económicamente activa de nuestros países. Yo quiero distinguir entre economía informal y economía popular. No es lo mismo. Para la economía informal, este sector es un número, no son personas. Para la economía popular son sobre todo personas que tienen el derecho a crear su economía, que tienen derecho a las necesidades básicas a través de su trabajo. Pero esta economía popular requiere políticas públicas que la promuevan. La propuesta del Papa Francisco de la creación de un salario básico universal, que subrayo, es de suma importancia, suma importancia, pues existe una relación positiva, econométricamente se puede demostrar, entre el salario medio del llamado sector formal y el ingreso promedio de los conductores de la economía popular, pues existe una articulación económica entre estos sectores. Esto quiere decir que a mayor nivel tenga el salario promedio de los trabajadores bajo contrato, será también posible elevar el ingreso medio del sector de la economía popular. Para terminar, la economía popular en América Latina y el Caribe y a nivel mundial, no solamente es una experiencia latinoamericana, ha dado vida a la economía solidaria, que podemos definirla como la economía popular que se desarrolla a través del valor ético de la cooperación, la ayuda mutua y el compartir. Hago notar que no son valores económicos, son principalmente valores éticos. Por lo tanto, la economía solidaria conjuga la teoría de los valores económicos con la de los valores éticos. Entonces, esta economía del compartir es muy antigua y desde tiempos prehispánicos. El AIN y la Minca vienen desde muy atrás. Es necesario entonces, pues, promover la economía solidaria ecológica, como bien ha dicho nuestra colega Elizabeth hace un rato, en sus diversas dimensiones, tales como la producción responsable, el consumo ético, el comercio justo, los servicios de la proximidad, las finanzas solidarias y el intercambio de saberes, que son los 6 sectores de la economía solidaria. Pero este caminar debe darse desde los territorios, que podríamos llamar los niveles micro y meso, entendiendo por mesoeconomía la economía del territorio subnacional, hasta el propio desarrollo humano integral solidario como tal, que sería el nivel macro y global, generando de esta manera una trazabilidad solidaria basada en la justicia, en el buen vivir, en la equidad y en que nadie quede afuera. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Humberto. Thank you so much for these contributions and for sharing some promising practices from Latin America. So the social and solidarity economy, which is also flourishing here in Europe. And I know that there were a lot of themes that were brought up. It's a lot to digest, and it's a big task for the next panelists to sort of take stock of all that and react to that. If I may try to propose some sort of red thread, between these different thematics, I think that some of the important issues that were mentioned by all the 5 speakers that we've listened to so far are, first of all, the importance of public policies and the role of public resources, for example, coming from that cancellation or other more innovative initiatives. And secondly, a deeper sense of democracy, perhaps, so that is applicable for the scrutiny of the role of the private sector. It's applicable for the way that we look at energy resources, which is really a source of life for all. So the question of who gets to decide which energy will be produced, how, by whom, and for whom is, of course, at the heart of our democratic issues and challenges. And lastly, also how we decide how to organize our economy, right? How it functions. And do we really have an economy that serves people and planet, or is it the other way around? So the social and solidarity economy, which is very widespread in Latin America and the Caribbean, really proposes a very concrete and real alternative economic model that is much more democratic and tries to look at going beyond no harm, which are the issues of corporate accountability mentioned at the beginning, but take a step further and propose alternative models that are real solutions, perhaps. So this is my attempt to
reales. Este es mi intento, digamos, de
everything we've heard so far. But now we move to our next panelists. So I would like to welcome here with us Mr. Iago Gil Aguado and also Mrs. Claudia. Wait a minute, Claudia Gintersdorfer. Apologies for my bad pronunciation, but it's a pleasure to have you here with us. So we'll first hear from Mrs. Claudia, who is the head of Regional Affairs Americas 1 Division at the European External Action Service, so the EAS. Thanks a lot, and I'll give you the floor to react to what you've listened to and perhaps comment on what you think are the key issues or proposals that are better aligned with where the European Union stands at right now, or how we can reflect together on how to address these major challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And first of all, really, it's a great honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. And I would also like to thank you all for your important contribution that you have made in the run-up to this upcoming summit between our two regions, the European Union, Latin America and Caribbean. As you know, we will have a summit in July on the 17th and 18th of July. And also tomorrow is a very important date because we will publish a new strategy of the, High Representative for Common Foreign Security Policy, Josep Borrell, together jointly with the European Commission. So it's a new strategy for EU relations with Latin America and the Caribbean. And our thinking was that this new strategy, in a way, would also be a proposal that we make to our partners in the region. And in a way, the summit that comes is an opportunity for us to get their reactions, their feedback, so that then we can build an agenda together, because this is what it's all about. I think one of the speakers referred to this old-fashioned concept of a donor-recipient relationship. It's definitely something that we want to move beyond. We see our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean as equal partners, and that we have to take decisions jointly in dialogue. And it has also been said that we think this is a region with which we share a lot of values, and perhaps more than with any other region in the world. We've said it well for a long time that the EU, Latin America and Caribbean, that we are natural partners. Our partnership is based on shared values and principles, and among those are, of course, democracy, human rights, also a commitment to multilateralism and to settling disputes through peaceful means. But we feel that in a way, for some time also there has been a kind of mutual neglect creeping in. We have paid lip service to these common values that are certainly there at the base, but then we have not paid that much attention to each other. The visits from European leaders to Latin America have become fewer, and also the other way around. In the region, other powers, well, notably China, of course, have become more important. The rise of China really in the last 20 years, it's mind-boggling in terms of not only trade and investment, but just their physical presence and presence in all spheres of life. And while we have nothing against that, we do feel that we as European Union also have something to contribute to Latin America that perhaps China cannot. As I said, we do have this shared commitment to democracy and human rights. Of course, there are always black sheep on both sides, I think, of the Atlantic, and there's no country with a perfect human rights record in the world. But I think overall we are natural partners. But what we are proposing now in this new communication is that we also want to become partners of choice, so that we actually choose to do concrete things together in the future. And maybe we cannot agree on 100%, but we want to focus on those things where we do agree and where we can do things together. And some of the issues that were mentioned here by the previous speaker are definitely issues where we think we can do fantastic things together. One of them is when it comes to fighting climate change, safeguarding biodiversity. There clearly we are, there's a great potential on both sides, where Latin America, of course, has a lot of resources in terms of biodiversity, also renewable energies and other energy resources. But from the EU side, we feel we now also, with this new commission, our top priority is really to make this so-called green transition, or whatever you want to call it, a success. And also internally, the European Union has adopted a raft of legislative measures that go in that direction. These are very ambitious proposals, to move towards carbon neutral societies, to achieve the goals of the Paris agreement, and also, there's the important COPs on biodiversity. So all these things are like at the top of our agenda, and with quite a lot of countries in the region, you know, they share our high level of ambition. Not all of them, but well, governments change. I mean, the biggest country there on the continent now, we have a new president that has who has promised that he will put a stop to deforestation, etc. So we think that in that field, really, there's this huge scope to work together. And I completely agree with Elisabeth when she says it's not just about switching energy sources, it's also about reducing our consumption of energy. Even those countries that are energy rich, overall, it does contribute if we manage to introduce energy saving measures. And we in Europe are also introducing measures that hit our population and also our businesses hard, especially now, as you know, the one of the fallouts of the war against Ukraine, well, have been rising energy prices, of course, also rising food prices that hit everyone globally, but also the people here, I mean, have seen their energy bills rise a lot, and so you know, I think there we really see eye to eye. Of course, there's a question of climate finance, but I think the European Union has also taken a lead on that. And I would like to mention perhaps that, as you know, the Caribbean is one sub-region that's particularly hard hit by climate disasters. So they're definitely on our side when it comes to fighting climate change. And so the summit that we're organizing, we also want to have a small leaders meeting with Caribbean leaders specifically, where we can discuss the issues that are more a concern for their sub-region. And just before our summit, there's another one organized in Paris. It's for a global financing pact. And one of the proposals that will be on the table there is the so-called Bridgetown agenda, which precisely tries to help countries that, well, have debt problems and at the same time are climate vulnerable, such as those in the Caribbean, how the international financial architecture can really take more into account their concerns and be reformed. And that is one proposal that we do also refer to in this new strategy that will come up tomorrow. To talk about, well, the economic justice and also the word human development has been mentioned a lot of times. You will see that in our strategy, I mean, we have well, obviously, we want to step up political relations. Also, our trade relations are very important. And as you know, there are a number of pending trade agreements that we want to conclude. But there's another big section where we talk about the fair green transition, also fair and human-centric digital transition, and economic recovery for human development. So in all these three areas, so the green, the digital, and also economic recovery, we have integrated the social dimension. I mean, that is there everywhere because we believe that without the social dimension, you know, these transitions will not work for the benefit of all our citizens. So this is a very important point, and this is where we feel that we as the European Union can kind of contribute something, where we're different from other actors, we're different from the US, we're different from China in that respect, because we do have, I mean, our ideal, maybe we have not achieved it, but we do have an aspiration to have cohesive societies. And we have had programs in the past, such as the EU-CELAC, where we also work together with countries in the region to address the relevant structural challenges, to have more also equal societies, because as you know, inequality is one of the big structural challenges that the region faces. Now, I cannot hide from you, and unfortunately, my colleague from the Commission, who was supposed to be here and is in charge of this agenda, in the communication, there's also this global gateway, which has become a buzzword in the European institutions. I mean, it's a huge exercise kind of and you will hear it a lot. But just to explain, I mean, for Latin America and the Caribbean, unfortunately, the funds that we have available for the current financing period are a lot more modest than we would have liked. And so really what we're trying to do is to leverage not only private, but also public and private funding around public policy aims. So we have a certain amount of grant funding that we have available, where we can do, we also have the Euroclima program, for instance, so where we can top up this grant funding that we have available. And we're trying to join forces with our member states, with the European Investment Bank, which is a green bank, to join forces around kind of these public policy priorities that we have identified. And as mentioned, they're green, they're digital, they're economic recovery, but with a social dimension. They are social cohesion and human development, including education and also health. We have a health partnership with the region that we want to expand because obviously they were very hard hit by the COVID. And there's also the whole citizen security dimension, which is also a huge concern for citizens in Latin America and the Caribbean, because, it's unfortunately, one of the most violent regions in the world, where we have programs, and that will continue to be one of the priorities. So in order to top up all this, we have what we call this Global Gateway Investment Agenda, where we're trying to identify projects that will contribute to public policy objectives, and where the investments should be investments that are quality, that bring local value added, that have sustainable supply chains. So this comes back to our first speaker, to Sorka. I'm of course not an expert in responsible business and all the current initiatives, but you have already mentioned a key one that's on the European agenda now, the corporate sustainability due diligence. So if that is now passed and implemented, that will be a huge step forward. I think, there again, we are one of the kind of leaders in this sense, even if on the global instrument, I understand there's still difficulties, not because we disagree with the fundamental objective that companies have to respect human rights, labor standards, and all the rest wherever they operate. But I understand from my colleagues who deal with this that it's more an issue of how the instrument is being negotiated and some of the details. So we need an instrument, but an instrument that actually works, because you can have the best global rules. If then they cannot be implemented or are not respected, then that obviously is a problem. What else did I? Well, human rights, democracy, were mentioned. These are core parts of our agenda with the region, always have been. I take note also the threats to the environmental defenders that have been mentioned by Elizabeth. It's something that we mention in our strategy. Just to say, the strategy, as you know, it's has to be like the common denominator between lots of different services that all have their different interests, and it's a rather short document, so we are at macro level, right? So we cannot read everything that we want to say in such detail, but we tried to put it in there. Well, you will see it tomorrow, but just to say that a lot of the themes that you have mentioned here definitely resonate with us. The main thing is that this upcoming summit, we really want to relaunch this bi-regional partnership that has been dormant for far too long. Last summit was in 2015, so it's high time that we meet again. And just to say, before the leaders meet, and we actually have good echo of that many leaders from Latin America and Caribbean want to come to Brussels for it. Before that, the week before, we will have a civil society and local authorities forum, including also a strong youth component, because we feel that's also very important for the partnership. So that is something that is being organized the previous week. I understand that also civil society is already organizing itself to have another event as well around those days. So there'll be a lot going on regarding mobilization of civil society. And there will also be a business roundtable just ahead of the leaders event. So I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you. And I think 2 points of everything you mentioned that I would like to emphasize are the importance of climate finance, and also I think we all appreciate the acknowledgement of the need to focus as well on reduction of consumption and thinking at really long-term solutions for the challenges of today. So now we'll move to our last, but definitely not least panelist, thanks very much for joining us, Mr. Iago Gil Aguado, who is the Counselor for Latin America and the Caribbean at the Permanent Representation of Spain to the European Union. I'm very sorry that you are the last speaker today before our concluding remarks, but I think we're all still interested in hearing the perspective of the Spanish government, especially in light of the upcoming presidency of the Council of the EU. I will ask if you can to try to stick to perhaps 7 minutes, so maybe we can still have 2 questions from the audience before the wrap up. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Luisa. Muchas gracias a los monseñores Cochata y Spengler y a los ponentes Sorca, Elizabeth, Humberto y Claudia. Este es un acto que me parece que nos parece muy interesante, y un informe que han producido que también es muy valioso en vísperas de la cumbre que celebramos en julio. Y como presidencia española se enmarca muy bien en lo que nosotros queremos hacer, que es una labor de pedagogía sobre la importancia de las relaciones entre América y Europa, porque nosotros nos consideramos un país europeo, pero también un país americano, hay que decirlo, y también por como lo planteó el monseñor Cochata, ese término de asociación de iguales, que a nosotros nos parece muy importante en las relaciones entre Europa y América del Sur, y América Latina y el Caribe. Volviendo al informe que han presentado, que se ha comentado, yo creo que hay una gran coincidencia en el análisis de la situación entre lo que refleja el informe, los ponentes.
In the analysis of the situation, in line with what the government, the Spanish government feels. We see the same risks that the humanity is facing, the environmental degradation, conflicts among countries and within countries, awakening of the rules and multilateralism, growing inequality in society.
Sus pueblos. También coincidimos en la importancia de esta relación América-Europa. Más de 1.000 millones de personas, casi 1/3 de los países de Naciones Unidas, actores clave en todo lo que es medio ambiente, tanto América como Europa. Coincidimos en que la cumbre es una oportunidad única para los dos continentes, tras 8 años sin una reunión de estas características, y en un mundo que ha cambiado mucho con la pandemia del COVID y con la guerra, y coincidimos sobre todo en la importancia del enfoque social. En un mundo que se está acelerando cada día más, pues para el gobierno español la cuestión de lo social, de no dejar a nadie atrás, es fundamental. Y una cosa que me gustó particularmente de su informe es la importancia de la esperanza, de ofrecer una visión positiva de cara al futuro. Y ahí quizás es donde el único tema donde a lo mejor no coincido en mi análisis completamente, es que en el informe, algunos de los ponentes, he visto a veces un tono ligeramente pesimista sobre algunas cosas, sobre todo en el tema comercial. Y nosotros desde la presidencia española de la Unión Europea actuamos desde la convicción de que Europa es una fuerza para el bien en el mundo, y América Latina también. Y que por eso, si las dos regiones colaboran, serán una fuerza para el bien de toda la humanidad. Y yo creo que eso es muy importante. Y eso se basa en una cosa que cualquier persona que conozca América y Europa lo sabe, y es que hay una comunidad de anhelos entre los dos continentes. El latinoamericano en la calle quiere lo mismo que el europeo en la calle. Quiere un estado de bienestar, quiere oportunidades para sus hijos, pero también quiere vivir en libertad. Entonces, y quiere que el Estado esté al servicio del individuo, no el individuo al servicio del Estado. Entonces yo creo que eso nos da mucho material para trabajar juntos. Hablando de temas concretos, pues voy a entrar un poquito en el que es más complicado, más tópico ahora, que es el tema de los acuerdos de asociación que tenemos, que es problemático, y yo creo que no hay que evitar los problemas. Lo primero es que estos acuerdos son mucho más que unos acuerdos comerciales, y eso lo tenemos que tener en cuenta todos. Son unos acuerdos también de cooperación y de diálogo político, de protección del medio ambiente, de derechos humanos, y eso es importante tenerlo en cuenta, los hace únicos, porque es lo que dijo Claudia, Europa tiene una oferta, y yo creo que esa oferta es muy interesante para América Latina. Luego está el tema de eso, de qué representa Europa. Pues hemos hablado ahora de la normativa europea sobre estándares medioambientales, sobre deforestación, proyectos que están en curso como el reglamento contra trabajo forzoso, la normativa sobre diligencia debida. Yo creo que todo eso es algo que Europa ofrece, ¿no? Y que podemos y queremos construir juntos con América porque estamos convencidos de que compartimos el mismo valor. Y en ese sentido se ha hablado mucho de justicia social. Me gusta recordar que la Unión Europea es aproximadamente el 7 o 8% de la población en el mundo, pero representa el 50% del gasto social del mundo. Y yo creo que eso dice mucho de lo que representamos. No siempre tenemos que pedir perdón. Y otra cosa donde a lo mejor discrepo un poco es que nosotros confiamos en las empresas europeas. Evidentemente es mejorable lo que pueden hacer, evidentemente hay abusos, toda construcción humana es imperfecta, pero sí que pensamos que pueden aportar muchas cosas a América, términos de derechos de trabajo, etc. Y ahí nosotros estamos trabajando también como presidencia, como España, en el llamado documento vinculante de Naciones Unidas sobre empresas y derechos humanos, ¿no? Que es un tema que consideramos que es importante y donde América y España y Europa pueden trabajar en la vanguardia de esto en el mundo. Y luego otro tema que no debemos olvidarnos. Es un burócrata, los burócratas somos prácticos. ¿Cuál es la alternativa? O sea, podemos criticar un poco lo que tenemos, que no es perfecto lo que ofrece la Unión Europea, que podíamos ir más allá, efectivamente, pero ¿cuál es la alternativa? ¿Cuál es el resultado de un no acuerdo, de no cerrar estos acuerdos? ¿Qué otros modelos se están ofreciendo en el mundo que sean mejores que los europeos que el europeo? Y yo creo que ahí pues es difícil encontrar una respuesta. Y luego otro punto muy importante que es, y nosotros estamos convencidos de ahí, la asociación entre iguales, es la importancia de convencer. Y eso es uno de los objetivos de nuestra presidencia. Convencer tanto a los americanos como a los europeos sobre las bondades de trabajar juntos. Lo que habló el monseñor Crociata sobre unos estándares comunes que vienen desde Europa, pues eso lo podemos hacer con este tipo de conferencias. Y sin olvidar casos un poco paradójicos, como por ejemplo tenemos el acuerdo de la Unión Europea con SICA, que lleva 10 años en aplicación provisional, porque está bloqueado por una región de un Estado miembro. Entonces, yo no dudo que la gente que lo está bloqueando lo hace con las mejores intenciones, pero la realidad es que, alegando criterios medioambientales, están precisamente... están precisamente evitando que se apliquen las cláusulas que prevén una mayor colaboración en temas medioambientales. Entonces, ahí es un
Collaboration among the environmental units. I think that needs to be worked at.
Poblaciones y a nuestros gobernantes. Volviendo a la presidencia española de la Unión Europea, y yo creo que con esto ya puedo ir un poco cerrando, hemos hablado de las transiciones y para nosotros es muy importante señalar que el mundo se enfrenta a 3 transiciones, no 2. Hay una transición medioambiental, evidentemente, hay una transición digital, pero también hay una transición social, que creo que hemos visto aquí y que todos los ponentes están de acuerdo con nosotros. Que además están muy vinculadas, porque la transición digital va a suponer muchos problemas sociales, la transición medioambiental va a tener que modificar cómo actúan nuestras sociedades. Y ahí de nuevo, pues nosotros podemos colaborar y muchos de los proyectos que figuran en la agenda de inversiones de la Unión Europea pues van en ese sentido, o sea, el Team Europe Initiative para los Amazonas, para los 5 bosques en América Central, la importante labor que realiza España, por ejemplo, en saneamiento y agua en América, ¿no? Y volviendo a la presentación de Elizabeth, evidentemente el objetivo de lucro no debe ser el único objetivo del hombre, pero también es verdad que a veces si conseguimos que la rentabilidad y el bien vayan de la mano, pues se pueden lograr resultados positivos. Entonces, por eso un llamado un poco también al pragmatismo por mi parte. Y en cuanto a la contribución de España, pues muchos de los temas que se han tocado, sean los defensores de derechos humanos, pues estamos muy activos, lo hemos visto ahora en Nicaragua, que hemos dado la nacionalidad a una serie de personas que han sido exiliadas y casi borradas del mapa por su gobierno. Vamos a organizar una conferencia en Madrid durante nuestra presidencia sobre visados para este tipo de gente que es víctima en sus países, desgraciadamente con muchísima frecuencia en América Latina. El informe ahora también, por ejemplo, la juventud, pues está el foro de juventud que está organizando la comisión. Y nosotros estamos también, ya que hablamos de sostenibilidad, trabajando mucho hacia la sostenibilidad del proceso, de este encuentro entre los dos continentes, ¿no? Queremos que las cumbres sean más regulares, que los compromisos que se adquieran, que haya un seguimiento, que no sean solo declaraciones y luego todo se va, cada uno vuelve a su país y sigue con sus asuntos y se olvida de eso. Entonces, la presidencia española de la Unión Europea yo creo que está trabajando mucho en el sentido que ustedes indican en este valioso informe y en sus ponencias. Por eso, muchas coincidencias, pero también yo creo que hay razones para ser optimistas. El pesimismo no lleva a ningún lado. Y además, para estar orgullosos de lo que hace la Unión Europea. Vivimos en un mundo complicado. La Unión Europea, y con esto acabo, tiene vocación, si se quiere, de ser vegetariana, pero vivimos en un mundo donde hay muchos carnívoros. Entonces, no siempre la Unión Europea, o sea, se va a lograr el mejor resultado si la Unión Europea se deja comer por los otros actores. Y lo mismo digo con América Latina, porque como señalé al principio, España se siente igual de europea que americana y pensamos que hay una conjunción casi total de valores y de intereses y de, sobre todo, anhelos en el futuro, y vamos a trabajar para eso. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guardo. So as you can tell, we're running short of time. I'm very sorry about this, but I think we had very knowledgeable and experienced, enthusiastic speakers. So I hope you appreciated hearing their inputs. If I may ask for a few extra minutes of your time, so we can take just a couple of questions before wrapping up. So we have a few questions from the chat. I would like to know if there's anyone in the room with a burning question. And then our colleague Katia can give you the microphone. So please think about it while I read out a couple of questions from the chat. One of the questions is from Hervé Bund to Mr. Hill regarding the association agreements. There is evidence that Central American countries such as Nicaragua do not respect the clause on respect for human rights. Could there be consequences for countries that do not respect this, or is it an optional clause? I don't know if you would be able to comment on this, but that would be a question to you. The other question, which it's not specified to whom it is, but it's from Fiametta from AVZI. She would like to highlight the importance of unstable and complex contexts in Latin America and the Caribbean, such as the Venezuela crisis and Haiti. So this is a very different dynamics of conflicts and violence that impact on human rights and the path of development in the region. Is the European Union planning to engage on these issues as well? So those are the two questions. Is there any question from the room? Yes, Adriana.
Good afternoon. My name is Adriana from Malta. I work today for an NGO network called Alliance 2015, but I'm an old friend of Caritas and COMECE. So thank you very much for this event. Actually, very insightful. And my questions would be rather maybe split between Mr. Guardo and Mrs. That's it. So first of all, thanks. Thinking about the summit, the upcoming summit, and the civil society days, civil society and local authorities days that will precede it. My first reaction is, well, first of all, thanks, Mr. Aguado, for giving us a better sense that the Spanish presidency is also in favor of having a permanent follow-up mechanism to these summits. And I would be curious to hear, how you are envisioning this And the second one is to Mrs. Gintersdorfer. We are happy to see a civil society forum, but how can we be sure that these discussions will ultimately feed into the Leaders Summit itself? How can the voice of civil society be effectively channeled to the Leaders Forum? How will they be taken into account? And just lastly, will there be a role for parliaments, national parliaments, European parliaments, in all that democratic discussion? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Adriana. Is there any last burning questions from the room? We can take just one more. Okay, so I'll give the floor back to you then, that you have a question about the association agreements and human rights clauses, the difficult dynamics in countries such as Nicaragua and Haiti, and if the EU is planning to engage on that, and then the questions about the summit, the civil society mechanism, the follow-up, and the role of parliaments. So who would like to begin?
If you like, I'll start from the end, maybe role of national parliaments. Well, immediately in the summit, I mean, we have this parliamentary assembly, which is a joint one between the European Union and Latin America, the Eurolat. And so we have co-chairs, one on the European side, one on the Latin side, and both of them will be invited to the summit, as they traditionally have been. I'm afraid immediately as part of the summit, I mean, that is as far as the parliamentary engagement goes, but of course, Eurolat also is preparing some inputs in the summit, and also they intend to follow up, and we have a very good interaction with the European Parliament, whom we see really as an ally in this agenda. On the Civil Society Forum, yes, of course, very pertinent question. I mean, the details of this are under discussion, but there will be some way for the conclusions or recommendations that come out of the Civil Society Forum to be presented to the leaders. Now, this is still under discussion at the highest levels, but what we have proposed is to do the same as we did in 2015, where there was a dedicated session where representatives of different preparatory events, and those included the Civil Society Forum, also the Business Roundtable, and also representatives of Eurolat, could actually physically come and present their recommendations to the leaders. But this is something that is still under discussion if this is not possible, because we're also looking at more recent summits, like how it was done in the EU summit, how it was done for ASEAN. So there were different models. I mean, I think in ASEAN, they sent a video message, or it could be written. I mean, there's different options, but yes, we will have to find a mechanism to make that happen. That is quite clear. Also, Commissioner Urpilainen and maybe some others will be physically present in the Civil Society Forum. Also, any of the leaders, be they European or LAC, that want to attend the Civil Society Forum or any part of it, I mean, they're welcome to do so. So much for that. Perhaps while on the permanent follow-up mechanism, it was mentioned by Iago, but it's also part of our proposal in the strategy that will come out tomorrow. And also, I haven't mentioned that we are aiming to have a joint summit declaration that is under negotiation with the region. And in both documents, we propose to have such a permanent mechanism precisely to ensure the follow-up between the summits. Of course, it's not easy in the sense that our counterpart, CELAC, does not have permanent structures, right? They don't have a secretariat. They depend entirely for the time being on the rotating presidency. So to some extent, it will also depend on them. But at the minimum, we foresee that there are, like contact points nominated on either side that will be in touch, that can ensure that there is a follow-up. And for that, we also have, we had a ministerial meeting last year with the CELAC in Buenos Aires. We agreed a kind of a bilateral roadmap of key events. And so we plan to have an updated version of that endorsed at the summit. So in a way, we have a roadmap that sets out we want to do this, that, and that in different areas. I mean, we had the launch of the Digital Alliance earlier this year. We had this ministerial meeting in Costa Rica on environment and climate. We had a high-level event on the pharmaceuticals. And there are many others. But I will give the floor to Iago if he wants to comment on the mechanism, because I know that it's a very important point for Spain. Of course, you're spoiled, you have the CEGIB, you have a very permanent mechanism to look after the Ibero-American summit process. So I guess that's a bit too ambitious for us, but still we want to move in the direction at least to have predictable regular summits and to ensure the follow-up between them.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Pues muchas gracias. Yo creo que Claudia ya lo ha dicho casi todo. Aparte que este es un ejercicio que nosotros sabemos que lidera el Servicio Europeo de Acción Exterior, nosotros colaboramos. Lo que sí que estamos haciendo es un poco un proceso de indicación sobre posibles instrumentos y sobre todo de hablar con nuestros amigos latinoamericanos y del Caribe para ver lo que ellos quieren hacer. Porque, como dijo Claudia, el problema no es la institucionalidad por parte de la Unión Europea, el problema es la falta de institucionalidad en la CELAC, y esa es una decisión soberana de los estados de América Latina y del Caribe, y nosotros lo último que queremos es venir y imponer nada a nadie, pero en nuestros contactos les decimos regularmente a los actores, a los principales de la región, bueno, nosotros nos gustaría que esto gane tracción, por favor, a ver si vosotros lo veis también así, pues a ver cómo os podéis organizar. Y nosotros confiamos mucho, se habla de que Colombia probablemente sea la presidencia de la CELAC en 2025, y sabemos que ahí tienen un presidente muy vinculado con la Unión Europea y confiamos en el liderazgo de un país como Colombia, que a lo mejor acoja la próxima cumbre y ayude a ir estableciendo este mecanismo. De cualquier forma, nosotros siempre quisimos que la cumbre fuera al principio de nuestra presidencia para tener esos 6 meses para seguir insistiendo en América Latina hasta finales de año, con el margen que tenemos. Y luego eso era lo fácil, ahora lo difícil que es Nicaragua, que es un país que, dijo Bismarck, que los Balcanes producían más historia de la que podían digerir, pues Nicaragua produce más preguntas de las que podemos contestar. Pero, o sea, volvemos al mismo tema. Aquí teníamos un acuerdo a nivel de toda con SICA, que precisamente los temas políticos no están en vigor. Por eso de ahí el proceso de reflexión de que a veces lo mejor es lo enemigo de lo bueno. Yo creo que en el caso concreto de Nicaragua, desde Europa, nadie se plantea medidas punitivas generales, ¿no? Nosotros tenemos unas sanciones contra individuos, y eso es también lo que nos dice sistemáticamente la posición nicaragüense. No estamos pensando ahora en introducir medidas que colectivamente castigan a la población, ¿no? Yo creo que, por un lado, hay la necesidad de dejar claro a la gente que está detrás de los abusos que se están produciendo en ese país, de que para ellos va a tener consecuencias esto, va a tener consecuencias, y por otro lado la convicción de que incluso, como hemos visto en Cuba, el ir hacia una pauperización de la población al final es algo que sirve a las dictaduras, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que la cuestión de un castigo comercial no se plantea en este momento, no sé cómo. Desde luego nosotros no vemos que sea una forma constructiva de intentar mejorar la suerte del pueblo nicaragüense. Y sí, por ejemplo, dando ejemplo, pues cuando el gobierno se preocupa fatal con muchos de sus ciudadanos, pues nosotros les ofrecemos la nacionalidad y así también hemos conseguido que otros países latinoamericanos lo hagan, y pues así, dejando claro que hay otro mundo posible. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I know we're short on time. We ran a bit over, but I would like to be fair and give the other panelists the opportunity to say one last word after the questions. And I know that our colleagues Elizabeth and Umberto would like to take this opportunity. So please, Elizabeth, within 30 seconds, 1 minute, what would be your final message today? And then we can listen to Umberto afterward.
Muchas gracias. Ha sido todo un honor escucharle, Iago. Creo que estamos en dos lugares muy diferentes del mundo. Usted está en Europa y nosotros estamos en la selva muchas veces. Entonces yo quería cerrar esto contándoles que hace un mes nuestro ministro de Energía nos dijo de frente que las cosas en el mundo se hacen bien y se hacen mal. y que debemos acostumbrarnos a que en Latinoamérica se hacen mal. Porque hay gente buena y hay gente mala, y que nos acostumbremos a que la gente mala está en el poder. Fue así, fue muy directo con nosotros y lo ha sido siempre. Entonces, cuando estamos hablando de política, creo que debemos tener en cuenta que a veces pareciera ser que el mal nos está ganando, pero este tipo de encuentros, al menos a mí me da mucha esperanza, porque nos permiten conocernos y nos permiten escucharnos. Luego, para cerrar, sabemos perfectamente que las propuestas hechas son utópicas, pero alguien tiene que decirlo, alguien tiene que empezar a hablar de que para lograr detener el cambio climático tenemos que cambiar como humanidad, y el Papa Francisco lo dice. El mundo tiene que cambiar, pero principalmente los seres humanos. Y los seres humanos debemos empezar a detenernos en nuestra forma de vivir tan agresivamente consumista. Si no, no vamos a detener el cambio climático, que eso es lo que nos une. Entonces, luego, pues podríamos algún día sentarnos a dialogar precisamente de qué implican los índices que planteamos. Pueden encontrar la información. Son investigaciones científicas y técnicas. Entonces, pues eso, agradecer a la COMECE, agradecer a la Iglesia Latinoamericana que también le apuesta por construir un mundo mejor. Y pues un gusto, y cuando vengan al Ecuador, si algún momento vienen, aquí estaremos para recibirles.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Humberto.
Sí, bien, muchas gracias también por esta oportunidad de un diálogo que ha sido franco, me parece a mí. Y están los puntos donde se clarifican consensos y algunos en los cuales todavía no están muy claros esos consensos. Yo quisiera centrarme en 3 puntos. Me parece muy importante que se haya puesto en mesa el tema de derechos humanos y empresas. Muy importante. Pero este tema tendría que dialogar con el tema muy antiguo sobre responsabilidad social de la empresa, corporate responsibility. Entonces, ¿cómo alinear estos programas de responsabilidad social con este enfoque de los derechos humanos, que se supone deberían ir más allá de lo que podría ser un programa clásico de responsabilidad social de la empresa? Muchas veces, pocas veces o casi nunca, las empresas rinden un balance social, ¿no? Hay mucha teoría sobre esto del balance social, el enfoque belga me parece muy sugerente. El segundo punto que quisiera poner en mesa, como bien se ha dicho, la importancia de esta alianza comercial, sin duda, que es muy importante, y quizás se podría dar pasos significativos en este campo, teniendo en cuenta el diálogo y el diálogo intercultural. Yo creo que en los tiempos actuales, y lo dice también el Papa Francisco, el tema no solamente el diálogo a secas, sino un diálogo intercultural con las visiones, con los puntos de vista, con las cosmovisiones. Y en ese sentido, creo que sería como muy importante en este tema de la alianza comercial, el tema del comercio justo, el comercio con justicia. Es un tema que creo debería profundizarse más. Y finalmente, el último punto que quisiera colocar en la mesa, hay experiencias de economía social y solidaria prácticamente en todos los países. Muy bien se ha dicho. Para mí fue siempre muy aleccionador, inspirador la experiencia del movimiento Mondragón, con una experiencia de más de 50 años y sigue siendo muy dinámico, como también hay otras experiencias integrales en Ecuador, por ejemplo, la experiencia Salinas, etcétera. En fin, de modo que este intercambio de experiencias inspiradoras de economía social y solidaria entre Europa y América Latina se podría desarrollar mucho más, incluso también en el sentido de un comercio con justicia, un comercio justo, el consumo ético, etcétera, y el enfoque ecológico, sin duda, ¿no? Evidentemente, el tema de políticas públicas sería el último tema que quisiera colocar en favor de todos estos procesos, ¿no? Porque, como bien se ha dicho, el Estado no puede quedarse neutro, no puede quedarse pasivo, o digamos, no orientarse hacia el bien común, como bien lo dice el Papa en Fratelli Tutti. Entonces, esto de tema de las políticas públicas también me parece muy importante seguirlo trabajando de forma conjunta. Gracias.
Thank you, Humberto. Thank you very much for these final inputs, which I think are very inspiring and really giving us a lot of ideas on how to move forward and follow up on the discussions. And for the very last concluding remarks, I would like to welcome Maria Niemann, the Secretary General of Caritas Europa. Thank you, Maria.
Thank you, Luisa, Your Excellencies and dear friends. Thank you so much for this moment of sharing and discussing together. Thank you also for your patience. We're running a little bit over time, but I think you had a very good conversation and I hope it was very helpful as well for our time ahead. You also bring the greetings from our President of Caritas Europa, Michael Landa, who is currently in Kenya for a mission, but I know that he's really happy about this joint work that we're having together. And I'm so proud and I'm so happy about the fact that we have been preparing it, the two regions together, so that we really come with a common contribution. The difficult challenges and the global imbalances that have been highlighted today during the conversations, they can only be addressed through their acknowledgement. So in other words, it's really important to recognize the root causes, the structural issues behind the crisis and behind the situations that our regions face. And also to recognize the historical legacies that continue to shape the extra activist production, and the unfair economic systems, the unequal terms of trade. We have heard that many times over the conversations today. So these challenges and these imbalances, they can only be addressed through international cooperation. And that's why the EU and the CELAC Summit is so important for us. It represents really an opportunity for the EU and for the Latin America and the Caribbean to engage in building common responses that really benefit the regions equally. I hope that this contribution is also timely. We have been working together in the past few months, together with our colleagues from the Bishops' Conference from both Europe and the Latin American Caribbean, and also the Caritas on these two regions together, listening in to the realities, to the experiences of our colleagues there, and trying to build a common response. So from this contribution and from the discussion that we had today, it became clear that the first important common response is to build an economy that puts people front and center, people-centered responses. And also considering the relevance of trade, the private sector investments and the global gateway, which we were discussing, it became clear in our conversations that the corporate accountability must be a key priority in the EU-CELAC partnership. It needs to be at the very core. It needs to be part of the design of any initiative engaging the private sector. And another reflection that we had today in our panel discussion is that one way to assess the potential of the new partnership is to reduce the inequalities and to foster social and global justice. That is to look at who will be the actors in the driving seat. For example, the energy transition promoted through the EU-LAC cooperation. And our perspective, as we heard today, is that leadership, and that means the political voice, the financial resources, the expertise recognition, that must be given to the actors that have been putting human rights and environmental protection first. That's the smallholder farmers, that's the women farmers, that's the indigenous communities, the social enterprises, the local civil society organizations operating in shrinking civil space, to name a few. And a third and last takeaway that I'd like to emphasize in these conclusions is that the EU-CELAC partnership cannot be only about what happens in Latin America and the Caribbean. It also needs to be about the EU internal policies and practices. Those have an impact on the lives and the well-being of Latin American and Caribbean people. It will be very hard for the European Union to fulfill its proclaimed goals of presenting a positive offer to the Latin American, Caribbean countries and the peoples, and of engaging in a dynamic of partnership of equals with the LAC region without taking the right steps to put an end to the unequal exchanges and or without taking the policy coherence for sustainable development seriously. So now, how can the EU-LAC partnership achieve all of that? How can it ensure corporate accountability? How can it ensure building an economy that puts people and the planet first? How can it put actors in the driving seats? So the right actors in the driving seats. So we have heard some responses to that today. That was also a question we were hearing from Mr. Aguado, you know, what's the alternative? So of course, these are difficult questions. So it's not just as easy to find the solutions and the alternatives, but that's exactly why we are here together. And that's exactly why we have been working so closely together to try to reflect on that and to try to contribute to that. Because we know that when there is a will, there is a way. And we also know that there exist very many innovative, sustainable, inclusive, powerful solutions already. Those come from ordinary people, those come from marginalized groups, they come from rural communities, they come from indigenous people. So I'd like to conclude with a note of hope that the political leaders from both regions will have the will to allocate also the adequate space for civil society organizations, for faith-based organizations, for religious actors to consult with us, to ensure our real participation, because we stand ready to contribute to these solutions. We stand ready, COMECE, CELAM, Caritas in Latin America and in Europe, together with the International Caritas Confederation, which have also been contributed to this. We stand ready to talk through some of these solutions and some of these alternatives. I'd like to just thank the panelists online and in real presence, the co-organizers. Thank you to COMECE for hosting us. Thanks to all the participants, again, in person, online, and also for your active contributions. Let's keep the conversation going, because we didn't also have so much time now to exchange, all of us, but let's keep it going. Before the summit, during the summit, we want to be part of that. After the summit, to follow up. I also want to thank the interpreters for enabling the exchanges. I wish a blessed day to our Latin American colleagues, and I wish a blessed evening to all of our European colleagues. And I wish to thank you for this good time together.